became a career firefighter with the Howard County Department of Fire and Rescue Service, the chief of the medical division, or EMS, the unofficial historian of the Howard County Department of Fire and Rescue Service. Reminiscing, my third 10 years in the Howard County Department of Fire and Rescue Services, Part 3, 1987 to 1996. These are the pictures of the June 23rd call. Again, the same day that the Tracy labor van happened, and I'd gone to it after a staff meeting down at MIMS, and on the way back, got caught at that fire, Old Frederick Road. This is just the family, mother and child that escaped from the building. I just posed the child with my helmet, and you may not recognize it, but this is Debbie Saunders' leg coming through the ceiling, drywall ceiling of the building. Whoops. Accidents do happen. This is the Tracy labor van incident. What had happened in a pickup truck. I had teed into a labor van with about 15 people in it. It was definitely a mass casualty situation that had occurred, and personnel within, I think, half hour, 40 minutes, we had triaged, treated, and transported all to area hospitals. This is a totally unrelated situation. On July 3rd of 90, just Chief Six was involved in a fender bender. No injuries. Apparently, I responded to that also. I don't remember it, but it says I was there. This was a interesting call on July at the fireworks at Lakefront in Columbia. We ended up running a rescue call for a child that had gotten his hand caught in the bed of a pickup truck. It took us about 45 minutes to an hour to partially free him from the pickup truck. And how we freed him, we sort of cut around his hand, but we couldn't easily remove his finger from the pickup truck, as you can see here. And so we cut that out, and we took that and his hand and him to the hospital, where we had better working conditions and tools to finally remove his finger from the predicament that he found himself in. This is particularly sad. This is probably one of the saddest things that has occurred in the history of the fire service, and especially the history of the Elk Ridge Volunteer Fire Department. On July 4th of 89, Kathleen Goulden was found to have been murdered in her residence on Old Washington Boulevard. Just a tragic and senseless loss. On that particular day, I was notified, and I ended up going down to the fire station just to chat with the troops, who were understandably upset because of the loss of a fellow Elk Ridgean, a fellow firefighting family, the Gouldens, and just a loss to the community in general. It was just such a tragic, tragic loss. Come to find out that the animal that had taken Kathleen's life was found ultimately to be a serial murderer in Howard County. He had taken not only Kathleen's life, but the life of 3 other individuals in and around Howard County. The animal was finally apprehended, and I believe there was ultimately a link connected him to the other homicide through DNA. And I think Keith Fisher from the Howard County Police Department finally made that connection and initiated the DNA comparisons, etc., and eventually was responsible for having the animal found guilty and hopefully put away for life. It doesn't diminish the life of these citizens of Elk Ridge and the void that it left in Elk Ridge and the Elk Ridge Fire Department with the loss of Kathleen. Just a house fire that I went to in Fulton. I was there. I really don't remember it, but I was there. This is just back to the helmet law that was passed because 3 incidents in which children were killed on bikes, and the helmet law was enacted. This is also the bill that I could not support as written. I just felt very, very strongly that there needed to be a training component for all 2nd and 3rd graders on bicycle safety, just a half-hour program. And no, we'll just have helmets. A crass but a real life observation. I think I went to all 3 of these accidents. I didn't want to inform the parents or the family members, but the only thing that a helmet would have done for those 3 individuals would have just made the difference between an open and or a closed casket. Helmet didn't make any difference into their survivability because of the traumatic injuries. So a helmet in those 3 situations would have made any difference other than the difference between an open and closed casket. This is an incident that did not occur in Howard County. This was an incident that occurred in Frederick County at Cunningham State Park, that 3 young brothers from a Mennonite family had gone to the park and had decided to wade in one of the lake there. And unbeknownst to them, there was a rock shelf that went out about 10 feet, 15 feet, then just suddenly, dropped off. And one child went out over his head, started to drown, and then eventually 2 other individuals went out to try to rescue him, and they drowned. The only reason I post that here is that the folks from the state park had contacted ICSF and then to assist with some some crisis management services for the personnel, many of them who were just teenagers themselves. And Dr. Mitchell and I went out on a given evening and spent time with the folks, reviewing the incident and giving them some advice on how to cope with this terrible, terrible tragedy. This is just a follow-up to the call where the gentleman said he saw a baby bassinet or infant carrier floating down a stream during a flood. Turned out to be a hoax, false alarm. He was duly sentenced for his stupidity. Just a call. That individual was in July of '88. Individual was bitten by a copperhead down in Savage, I think, is where it was. The only reason I'm putting that in here is that there are poisonous snakes in Howard County, copperheads, and in our previous podcast, I put down that I had actually on a brush fire in Daniels had actually laid down next to a copperhead within 18 inches of a copperhead at the top of a mountain in Daniels. Fortunately, the snake was dead because it bent over by fire that had crested the hill and kept on going. The fire did kill him, but it did not discolor him. Even with that, I laid right down next to it. Go figure. The other reason I'm just posting this is that a good friend of mine, Larry West, and his son, Brian West, had a very unusual hobby of collecting, hunting regional poison snakes, copperheads, and rattlesnakes. But Larry's son, Brian West, took it a step further and collected venomous snakes. I mean, we're talking about badass venomous snakes from all around the world. He did have a license to collect them. He collected them and kept them in his basement in cages. And he was very passionate about his dealing with dangerous poisonous snakes. He became an expert in talking about poisonous snakes and the myths and facts about poisonous snakes. He even had his own personal collection of anti-venom that he kept in the refrigerator in his house. And on multiple occasions, that anti-venom, and specialized in different poisonous snakes. One anti-venom, snake anti-venom, doesn't work on everything. So he had different anti-venoms that he had and shipped them out. Emergency state police would pick him up or pick up the vial and were transported by a police car or helicopter to wherever it needed to go on the East Coast. Brian had done a couple lectures for me in Howard County talking about, again, poisonous snakes, facts and myths. And he even brought with him at that time, and the lecture was at Station 8, brought with him like 15 different specimens, starting with copperhead and then cottonmouth rattlesnakes, and then larger rattlesnakes, and finally up to cobras, small cobras, and then finally the final snake that he pulled out was a king cobra, and that was impressive when we were in at Station 8. And that's a whole nother story about that evening and my stupidity. I got it on videotape. Anyway, I had him come down and do a presentation at one of our world congresses for the International Critical Stress Foundation. And I had actually set up an appointment for Ken Brown and Mike James, a reporter from the Sun, to go to his house on a given Saturday for him to, show us his collection and talk further. That was going to be on a Saturday morning. On a Friday morning, I always woke up to WFRE country news station in Frederick. The alarm came on just as the news was coming on, and it came on and it just said, last night a Thurmont County man was bitten by a cobra and died at the hospital. That got my attention. Finally listened, and it was Brian West. I mean, my goodness gracious, we were going to see him the next day. I guess we weren't. So that was quite a deal. This is just Brian holding one of the king cobras that he's just very passionate about. And there's a whole story that I have about Brian and his education for poisonous snakes and snakes in general. This is, again, just going back to the construction worker that fell and was injured in a fall, Dorsey Hall. Apparently another lightning strike down in Laurel that I went to that I don't even remember. This is the accident of Medic 9. Medic 9 was responding to a call at the intersection of 175 and 95, was slowly going through the traffic light, siren on, slowly passing through the intersection, lights on, and was teed into by a vehicle that hit him on the passenger side. And when it did, it caused him to roll down the hill multiple times until he wrapped around a telephone pole. The firefighter, paramedic who was driving the vehicle, sustained injuries, but did survive and went on back to a very good career until he retired. But this is just a close call that we had with Gary Chandler being involved in this incident. Just another call that I was on in August of '89 at the General Electric plant located on Alexander Bell Drive. Don't remember it, but apparently I was there. This was just another call that on Rogers Avenue, a farmhouse, a style building, old building that caught fire, and did about about $50,000 damage that I was on. This is just back to the incident where Medic 9 was struck at the intersection of 175 on 95. We were just very lucky that day. Another homicide that I was on, I didn't realize that I'd gone to so many homicides in my career. But anyway, this was a call for a shooting on Red Branch Road at a business, and as it turned out, it was a domestic. The husband reported to the work site of his wife, shot her, and then turned the gun on himself. This happens to be the very first time that I had met and worked with Tom Norman. He had just been hired by the fire service, completed his training, was out in the field, and he was the paramedic that arrived on the scene. On that very call, I knew that Tom was going to be a keeper for the fire service. He had managed this call very, very quickly and efficiently before I got there. I got there relatively quickly, but by the time I got there, he had gotten things sorted out, had confirmed one was deceased and one was going to be transported to the hospital. And he had done all the basic life support, advanced life support treatments, and we were ready to transport the patient to a landing site private at Howard High School. But the first time I met him, and I was just really impressed with his performance and knew that he was going to be a great asset to the Howard County Fire Service. This is just another fender bender on Trotter Road near Route 108, a fatality that occurred with 2 vehicles. Again, this is just the harkening back to the helmet law for individuals to wear a helmet, and I support that, but I could not agree with just a helmet law without some sort of education, especially for young children, 2nd and 3rd graders. It just seemed to me be an easy fix to have a half-hour, 1-hour assembly every year for kids in the 2nd or 3rd grade to receive that education. And the reason I was passionate about that is that the 2 or 3 fatal accidents involving kids on bicycles in western Howard County, the helmet would not have made any difference in their survivability, and the only difference that it would have made would have been an open and closed casket. I rest my case. This is another homicide, double homicide as a matter of fact, occurred in Allview Estates back in August of '89. A family of 4, mother and father and 2 boys. The mother had come from Vietnam, or had met her husband in Vietnam, got married. They came back over here to the United States and lived. Had 2 children, roughly high school age, and for whatever reason, on a given morning, Mrs. Fetro had a emotional crisis and went into her husband's bedroom and shot him in the head, went to son's bedroom and shot him in the head, and was going to the bedroom of the other son, and just as she was leaning over to pull the trigger, the son wakes up and their eyes make contact. That was enough to deter the mother from shooting the son. He got up, left the house, and called the police. I responded. By the time I got there, personnel, the scene was under control, etc. As I got there, police were just bringing out Ms. Fetro in handcuffs from inside the building, and police officer sergeant came down and wanted to know if one of the fire service people could be escorted in to confirm that the 2 people were deceased, and everyone looks at me, so I was the one that went into the respective bedrooms and did indeed confirm that both individuals were deceased. Howard County has been the scene of tornadoes over the years. This is one back in '92 that started near Folly Quarter Road and also near Walt and Drive. That's where it first touched down, and then proceeded northeast across 32, across the Howard County Fairgrounds, and causing almost $1 million damage. This is a house on Walt and Drive, I believe it was, that a tree had fallen and crushed the house. There are 2 elderly occupants in there. Neither of them were injured, but they couldn't get out because the doors were jammed, the windows were jammed also, and ended up getting them out of the residence. And then there were other residents damaged within 3 miles or so of that. It made for an interesting afternoon. Back to the double homicide in Allview Estates by Ms. Fetro. Just further discussion on her mental capacities to stand trial. Back to tornadoes. This specifically, I was able to secure the Maryland State Police helicopter to come to Howard County and take the county executive, Chief Frank, and I on an aerial tour of where the tornado had gone through. So that was an interesting little ride. This was a situation where in less than 24 hours, I responded to 2 separate steamroller accidents that had rolled over and crushed the operator. One was on Old St. John's Lane, and the second was on Route 144, just west of Route 32. I'd never run a steamroller accident before, never ran one since, and yet within less than 24 hours, I had run 2 two separate calls involving steamroller rollovers. Both of them, miraculously, the operator survived, and it was just nothing short of a miracle that they did. One survived from being crushed by the back seat of the driver's seat, and the other survived because when the steamroller rolled, it squished the operator into a very muddy area, and it just pushed him into the mud instead of crushing him. Had it been on dry land or on asphalt, he'd have been killed, but he was pushed into the mud by the force of the rolled over steamroller. Again, just the incident information in the press about the accident. Again, this is just the ongoing battle, ongoing discussions of the ALS, EMS, and vehicles to be used to provide that service. Just the continuing saga. Another program that was initiated were teddy bears that I was able to get C&P Telephone, Ellicott City Kiwanis Club, and the Clarksville Lions Club to donate teddy bears to be placed on ambulances. That when we were transporting small children, allow us to give those to the children in part to let them have a positive memory of their trip. And also many times giving them that teddy bear on the ambulance distracted them from what was going on, and they could focus on the teddy bear versus the traumatic situation that surrounded them, or their parents, if the parents were the ones that were injured. Again, just a couple more calls that I was on. I don't remember them, but I was there. The top incident was a house trailer that caught on fire, and the bottom incident is the Rogers Avenue call, and I was on both those incidents. Another cave-in, this one unfortunately was on Timber Trails Court in the Pine Orchard area. An individual that was down in a trench, 15 feet deep without shoring, was covered by a collapse. We spent about 12 hours, almost 12 hours, the first night trying to recover the body, and it became apparent that we were spending too much effort and it's too dangerous the way we were trying to recover the body because we didn't know exactly where he was. So 2-3 o'clock in the morning, we called it a night. I came back the next day, ripped out all of the shoring material or cave-in, ripped it all out, and then we just did a cutback, meaning got bulldozers to come in and just started a cutback to make sure that the sides of the trench were at a 45-degree angle, which negated any further cave-in. And the next day we did that, and after 3 or 4 hours, 5 hours, we were able to recover the body of the individual. There was a whole process of investigation. I believe that in this particular incident, a significant fine was levied on the company that was doing the trenching. And again, this is the second day that we were looking for the individual. You can see where construction equipment had done the cutback, meaning the sides of the trench were now at a 45-degree angle, which negated any further collapse and made it safer for rescue personnel to go inside and recover the body of the deceased. Incident on September 15th, 89, just a house fire at Farside in the West Friendship area. I was on it because I took the picture. I don't remember the call. I was there. And then 2 other calls that I was on, 3 other calls that I was on. And I don't remember any of them, but I was there either as EMS1 or I think it's EMS1 was my designation then. So 3 other calls that I was on that I cannot remember. Remember the hot air balloon on Old Frederick Road near Watersville Road, struck power lines, knocked out electricity for a while. There were no injuries, but it's not every day that you get to see a balloon that's hit some electric lines and is now down on the ground. This is just, I had the good fortune to go to Miami, Homestead, Florida, post Hurricane Andrew. The Howard County Fire Service detailed me, Danny Merson, and Mark Maggio from the police department to go down. And it was an experience, as I'm sure some of the current fire service people who have been down to tornadoes down south will attest to, but it was an eye-opener. And I ended up taking a whole bunch of videos, etc. when I came back and shared with folks. This is while we're down there. On the extreme left is Doug Mitchell, Jeff Mitchell's brother, and myself. The absolute irony for me that we stayed at the Orange County Training Center in trailers there. That's where we had lodging. But the hurricane did very minimal damage there. And in fact, everything was open. I mean, nightlife was going on as normal. We had spent a day down in Homestead, and at night we came back to life as normal. But when we were down at Homestead, the devastation was almost indescribable. I mean, you drive miles and buildings where homes were knocked down, businesses were knocked down, no electric, no traffic lights, no, it was just incredible. You would get lost if you try to go off the highway any distance. You would get lost because there are no street signs, and you just didn't know how to get back. People were living in tents, living in the open, and yet you drive 20 miles north, and this is, we drive 20 miles north, and it's life is normal. That was tough for me to digest. This is interesting. On September 23rd of 95, the Fire Museum was dedicated, and nice ceremony, dedication, etc. And ceremony was over with. Pretty much everyone has left when suddenly a boulder comes rolling down the hill across the street from the firehouse and lands square in the middle of Court Avenue. Just hours before, people had been standing there, and there could have been a very tragic outcome had that occurred hours earlier, but it didn't. So it made for an interesting photo op. Just me talking about Hurricane Andrew and my adventures. Two situations. The top one on August 11th was a rescue alarm on Interstate 95 near the rest stop. A northbound car had come all the way across the median strip, popped up onto the southbound lanes sideways, and a large passenger vehicle teed into the smaller vehicle and literally cut it in half. So you had two pieces of the car that were on fire, and you had the car that did the hitting. It was on fire another 100 feet down the street. The call came in. Kenny Brown was actually the first person on the scene with Medic 10, and when he pulls up, what he sees is three vehicles on fire. There's a body laying in the middle of 95, and in the median strip, you had dozens of people laying on the ground. So he's thinking, like, what the heck? I've got multiple fires. It looks like one fatality and multiple people laying on the ground. And as it turned out, what that was indeed a fatality. But the fires were actually two vehicles, but one in two pieces. And all the bodies on the median strip were the three occupants of the big vehicle had gotten out, and they were laying on the ground. And then all the citizens, as they stopped by to help, they're all laying on the ground trying to help the injured people. So it was quite the sight when Kenny pulled up. When he finally got things sorted out, things sort of calmed down as far as an event, and it was handled normally. Another call, I don't remember on the bottom picture, but apparently I was there because I took the picture. This is just going back to the Medic 9 crash at 175 and 95. The picture of Medic 9 on its side. An absolute irony of this, when that vehicle was struck and it started rolling sideways, and it was destined to hit this pole. He hit the pole so that the impact was taken by the bottom frame of the vehicle. Had that vehicle hit any other way, had it hit top first or either side, the operator, Gary Chandler, would have been killed because the vehicle had been crushed around him. The sturdiest part when he was going to hit that pole would have been the frame, and that's what saved his life. Okay, this is just a continuation of the Medic 9 accident. Just a fatal fire went to about a mile from my house. Wood frame building caught on fire. She was trapped inside. There's essentially a building collapse, and it took probably an hour or so for us to locate the deceased in the residence, actually in the kitchens where we found the patient. Again, just the Medic 9 crash. The Timber Trails cave-in that took us 2 days to recover the body. You can see that the company was fined $68,000 for that cave-in death, and I think at that time was one of the highest penalties, monetary penalties ever levied. Just a newspaper account of the fatality in Western Howard County took the life of the elderly patient. This is just a picture that I think is kind of cute. I took Route 40 and Rogers Avenue motor vehicle accident with several injuries, and I just thought it was particularly cute. Mothers on the ground being placed on a full backboard. The two EMS providers assisting. On the right is Mike Anashevsky, and on the left is firefighter Dove, I do believe. But what caught my interest was the little tyke looking at his mother, a little distraught, etc. But mom trying to tell him that she's really okay. I think we gave him a teddy bear, minimize his trauma. This is another bicycle accident on Little Tucson Parkway. Again, they were wearing helmets, and they did survive. But there's another call that I'd gone on. This was a particularly disturbing call that impacted many in the fire service back on October 31st of '88, house fire on Lombardi Drive, A fire ended up killing 2 young boys. The fire itself had been started by another occupant of the building. Actually, the house was 7, 8 occupants. They were all adopted individuals, and the fire was started by one of the occupants, and the 2 other occupants were killed. Actually, the fire was a split foyer. The window that you see at the bottom, that was the room where the fire started. When it went up the steps, it blocked the exit of the back of the house. There's a section of the house to the rear, and individuals could not get forward because of the heavy fire. A little bit more with this incident. This incident played out and took many, many different twists and turns. Initially, the 16-year-old boy occupant of the house was hailed as a hero because after the fire started, he alerted the rest of the occupants of the house to get out, and they did. Tragically, 2 were killed. All the occupants were taken to the house next door. I had gone over to talk with the folks. Found out that the one boy was, a hero. He had alerted everybody, but also he had severe physical handicaps. Couldn't walk. He scooted along the floor. He needed crutches. So I said, I'm going to go to the hospital to check on the ambulance crews who had taken the 2 boys that died. Check on the crew, but then I'll get crutches and I'll come back. I did just that. An hour or 2 later, come back, walk to the house where the family was, and now the state fire marshal's office is arresting the 16-year-old kid for arson, and he acknowledged that he had started the fire that in turn had killed the two other occupants of the building. He was arrested, was detained both in juvenile detention and also in a mental health facility for a while. If I remember correctly, the parents, and it's not the parents, these were individuals that were in the process of being adopted, but the male homeowner, who actually, when this fire occurred, they were down south in the Caribbean looking to get some more kids to adopt. And the bottom line is they never went to see this child, and just hoped that he would be thrown in prison for the rest of his life. And I didn't think that was actually compassion. There are a whole lot, many backstories about this whole incident, and I can, email me and I can tell you some of the backstories. But anyway, another ironic thing that happened, that call occurred, is over and done with, going through the legal process. About 6 months later, I'm minding my own business around 3 o'clock in the morning, and I get a phone call from communications, and they say, hey, and at that time, communications is also running the hotline for the International Critical Incident Stress Foundation. And they had received a call from an individual in Hawaii just saying that, hey, we just had this terrible fire over here. That fire occurred. It killed a mother and father. It killed one of a newlywed couple that had just been married less than a year. And also the fire itself was started by the son of the occupant of the house. So you had the homeowners were killed, a newlywed, one of the newlyweds who was related to the homeowner was killed, and the son was actually the person who started the fire. So the individual from the fire department out there was calling for some guidance on how to deal with the fire service people to get them over this emotional trauma. And in the course of the conversation, he wanted to know, where are you calling from? I said, Maryland. Where in Maryland? Ellicott City. He said, Ellicott City? He said, where's ICSF located? I said, in Ellicott City. He said, you're not going to believe this, but the surviving newlywed said, you're not going to believe this. About 6 months, a year before, that he or she was involved in a fire that was started by a 16-year-old, killed 2 occupants. I'm thinking, you got to be kidding me. So the bottom line is, one of the survivors of the fire on Lombardi Drive had gotten married, had moved to Hawaii, and then was involved in a similar incident where a fire was started by a brother, killed parents and a newlywed. What are the chances? Well, I'll tell you one more thing. 6 months later or whatever after that, I'm minding my own business. I'm coming back from a call at 2:30 in the morning or something like that, nearing Route 32 when they put out a call for a medical alarm at a residence on Forsyth Road. I was nearby. It's going to be Station 3's area, and I figured I don't have anything else better to do at 2:30 in the morning. I'll go over to the call. I get there first. It's one of those McMansion places, and I go up and knock on the door, and I remember 2 things when the door opened. One was that while I was at McMansion, it was a very sparsely furnished McMansion, and I look, and all the kids there, it looked like the United Nations. The kids in the first fire had all been adopted from different countries. And so when they opened the door this time, X months later, for this medical alarm, I'm looking at it, looked like the United Nations running around. Anyway, went upstairs, and patient was just turned out to be a suspected overdose. Patient was just saying, I want to die, and I just want to talk to my boys. Started to assess the patient. Medic 35 came in, turned it over to them, and again the patient's just saying, I just want to die, but I just want to talk to my boys. Backed off, went over to the other side of the bed to talk to the husband, chit-chatting, and then he reveals to me, he says, she's had a tough time dealing with this all. About a year or two earlier, we'd had a house fire that killed 2 of her adopted children, and all she wants to do now is just talk to the 2 boys. In the meantime, the one EMT female was kneeling next to her, talking to her, giving excellent patient care, and in the course of the conversation kept telling the patient, tell you what, let's go to the hospital. You can use my phone to call the boys. And I kept hearing that. I'm on the other side saying, nix that. And she's, nah, I got this. And she keeps saying, you can have my phone. I went around to the other side of the bed, gently grabbed the EMT, who meant well, pulled her away. As that phone call you're talking about, that's going to be a long distance phone call. Anyway, we all saw the humor in that, I guess.
Please use your remaining heartbeats wisely and not waste a single precious one.